Hi, this is Steve, and I want to welcome you back to the Tech Leader Talk podcast. So, what happens when a successful Silicon Valley executive leaves the tech startup world and joins a Fortune 500 company? Well, keep listening and you're going to find out. Because that's what happened when Atif Rafiq made that exact move. He left a Silicon Valley company, went to work for McDonald's, and he's going to share kind of the motivation behind that and what he learned by working in kind of both of those two different worlds or those environments. So he shares his insights as a business leader and the first chief digital officer in the history of the Fortune 500. Today, he's regarded as one of the top management thinkers, and he's regularly quoted in Wall Street Journal, Fortune Magazine, Forbes, and TechCrunch. And today, he's the CEO and co-founder of Ritual, which is a company that helps transform team-based problem solving using workflow and artificial intelligence. And he talks about how Ritual was created and how his previous experiences, both in Silicon Valley and with several Fortune 500 companies, impacted the formation of Ritual. This is a very different interview because Atif has a very different background, and I loved every minute of it. I've talked to a lot of tech people. I've worked with lots of tech leaders, and he's definitely unique and has a great story and some fantastic lessons. So I know you're going to enjoy learning from his experiences, and I'm sure you're going to get some new ideas for your own business, just like I did. So let's get to the interview with Atif. Hi, Atif. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Steve, it's a pleasure to be with you.
So I reviewed some of your background, and I know some of your story. Didn't share it all in the intro, but you have a very unique background. I've worked in Silicon Valley myself, and I work with lots of tech companies. And you made an interesting transition away from the Silicon Valley tech world. Tell us about your journey. How did you kind of get started, maybe in Silicon Valley and things, and then what's happened since then?
Well, Steve, you're right. I mean, my journey, I like to say I've had three metamorphoses in my career, which is probably normal because I've been working for over 25 years. But yeah, just to set the tables, I did begin very early in the internet era, so to speak, and the way that got started was a little bit of luck. I out of college, I worked at Goldman Sachs, and I decided, I didn't want to be an investment banker or be working with numbers all day long, but tech seemed really interesting. The internet was just kind of burgeoning in the mid 90s. So I wrote a letter to the CEO of AOL, a man named Steve Case, who's very famous. And he actually read the letter and gave it to another executive. And I received the call to be interviewed by that company. And I was fortunate enough to join them at the time where they had really a rocket ascent and were the kind of most central company in the internet. That sort of got me started. So yeah, I got started through a little bit of a kind gesture by a CEO who actually read a letter that I had written him. And then I just kept, I was fortunate enough to be at the center of, prominent internet companies like Yahoo and Amazon over the next 15 years, essentially being a product led general manager is sort of the core skill set. And I thought I'd do that forever. But in 2013, you may recall Mark Andreessen coined the phrase software is eating the world. And what that meant was that every company at some level thought of themselves as, being tech enabled or disrupted by tech potentially.
Yeah.
So I actually made a transition from pure, Silicon Valley companies to, Fortune 500 companies that are not known for tech, companies like McDonald's and Volvo. And there, the way I got going was I had some outreach from the CEO of McDonald's in 2013. I became the first CDO in the history of the Fortune 500. It wasn't a role. And I began to, work with very talented people that I brought in and some within the organization to really define, how to make a non-tech company, more direct to consumer, focus on
Hmm.
digitization, really drive customer experience, and just operate more like a tech company. And that's what I did for 11 years in the C-suite of large companies.
Okay, that's interesting. What was the motivation? I've met a lot of people, and I don't know anybody who made quite a significant jump from Silicon Valley to a Fortune 500 that's not, like you said, traditionally thought of as tech. What was exciting about that, or what motivated you to make that change?
Yeah, I think the Venn diagram of people who've done both is very small, and usually it's a two-way door, meaning like there's a little bit of it doesn't work out, and they go back to Silicon Valley because they're like, hey, this is a totally different culture and
Yeah,
level, and that's totally true. But yeah, in terms of my motivation, Steve, for taking it on is really more, I it was a calculated bet, and I figured that, if it worked out, then many other companies would need this, and that could become very interesting, as a way to kind of transform um, or do something that hasn't been done before. Because, of course, companies like Meta and Amazon and, all the other great tech companies, they have, many people like me who are general managers or kind of leading an area or a function or a business unit. But if I make the transition to the Fortune 500 and able to kind of evolve their cultures and introduce some of the culture that you find in tech companies around innovation and problem solving, that could be more impactful. So it was a calculated bet. It could have flopped on his face, and then I just head back to the West Coast. But it began to work, and of course, the whole world worked that well. And now you have these kind of roles and functions are to kind of taken for granted in
yeah,
the Fortune 500. They are the norm. But being the first one to do it is, of course, extremely challenging, and sometimes you doubt yourself. And did I make the right move? But it turned out to be a good calculated bet.
what was most maybe unexpected about that? I mean, I know it's kind of completely new, anyways, but looking back on it, what was maybe most intriguing or most surprising about the switch into that CDO role?
The switch from tech companies to from pure play tech to kind of your traditional Fortune 500, I think the biggest thing you encounter is just a very different way of thinking about opportunities, about how to solve problems, and and what I mean by that, Steve, is essentially, your Fortune 500 company has been around a while. It's really more of an execution culture. So you typically think about, what's the quickest way to, um, you know, address an issue, and that is something which could be quick, but not necessarily the most kind of durable way to address a problem. And so it's a little bit more about incrementalism, doing the same thing as last year, but a little bit better, and that's good enough. And Silicon Valley, of course, is more continuously about clean sheeting things and saying what does good look like, and a month from now, the assumptions could be different. The world could be different. There could be new disruption out there. So you're always kind of thinking about, from scratch at some level, what does
Yeah.
good look like, and what's the right direction of travel? What's the right North Star? Um, and that is sort of, a little bit of a culture clash, of course, because doing things a little bit better is about incrementalism. Thinking about, what does good look like, and a North Star is more about, wanting to continue to pioneer things. And so you have to find the middle ground between both, in order to be effective in that environment.
Okay. So, how just generally, how did you kind of merge those two? You're coming from the Silicon Valley world and that culture, that kind of mindset, to something that's quite different. How did they give you a fair amount of flexibility since this was something new to experiment with?
In the beginning, absolutely. I think there was a lot of trust, and I give credit to the CEO of McDonald's, which there were two in my first couple of years. So both of them, gave a lot of space for exploring things, and a lot of trust that, hey, this person probably has a better idea of what the future of tech means for the restaurant business or consumer experience. But I think, you need to figure out a way to bring the whole organization along. And so the main thing that you need to focus on is how to get people comfortable with ambiguities. Because any new idea you have, if you said, let's make it up, well, let's do delivery. And we're talking about 10 years ago when it wasn't a thing. For example, you need to be able to, um, you know, get the organization comfortable that even though there are a lot of questions in the beginning, that's actually normal. The thing that trips up a traditional culture is where, it seems like very scary because there are a lot more questions than answers in the beginning. But,
Mhm.
everybody who kind of is involved with innovation knows that that's a matter of course. Like you're always going to start with questions. It's more about, how quickly can you learn what needs to be understood to develop a point of view based on those questions. And what does that tell you about whether it's a good idea or not? And this requires space. And one thing I tried to do was create a space for what I call execution, which is we don't need to have any whether an idea is a great one or a terrible one, but we do need to create the space to be able to explore it and do that purposefully so we can protect it before we have an opinion. And doing that is actually quite hard. And it's relates to my current work around, workflow, so to speak. But that I think is really the key to injecting a little bit more innovative sort of like DNA in a company. It's creating the space for exploration.
Okay. So, with the experience that you've had with McDonald's and Volvo and other traditionally non-tech companies, what have you learned, or what kind of advice would you then give to tech company leaders, whether it's a startup or a growing company that maybe they don't think of because it's not talked about in the Silicon Valley circles?
Well, I think now what's being talked about, and you read about what Salesforce is cracking down and not having as nice a culture, or Google a year ago and Spotify, their CEOs were in the media around we're demanding more from teams and we demand more from the organization in terms of impact. All of these things are coming from the same root cause, which is essentially that that there's no blank check experimentation. Blank check experimentation is not a good practice. It's wasteful, um, and it doesn't happen at all in the rest of the Fortune 500, probably to an extreme, which is why they're slow to innovate. But what can Silicon Valley learn is, Silicon Valley lives and breathes on exploration and constantly pushing new frontiers, but it has to be purposeful. And so, for example, it's not a matter of saying, "Well, we have an idea, we just want to build a prototype." I mean, that that might be part of the way of kind of figuring out if something's going to work or not. Um, but it may not be everything that you need. So, for example, at Amazon, that's why they write a memo or a strategic narrative because you know you can create a prototype that can make it clear that the technical hurdles are can be overcome, or you can learn something by showing it to users. So you learn some things, but good ideas, and especially to make a strong business opportunity out of something, it's a broader set of considerations. And so at Amazon, you add the strategic narrative and you do a lot of work on that. You do maybe 50 iterations on it to really understand the space very well and make the list of questions and the unknowns a lot smaller than when you started in the beginning, and the rest of Silicon Valley can learn something from that.
Yeah.
So purposeful exploration is more than just prototypes. It's about defining the problem well. It's about sourcing the right questions that need to be understood. It's about getting to the bottom of those questions. You can do all of that without writing a line of code, and I think that's an important lesson.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That's valuable. So you've recently launched a new company called Ritual. Tell us about that.
Well, Rich really um, solve a companion for teams. So, teams may be working on a brand new idea. Let's say you're McDonald's and someone has a bright idea. let's launch a coffee subscription. People get unlimited coffee. They pay us one price a month, and they can come through the drive-through anytime they want, get their coffee. It may sound like a promising idea. Some people will love it. Some people will hate it. Um, but how do you actually kind of get to the bottom of it and come up with recommendations and ultimately make a yes or no decision on it? Well, there's a workflow to that. And it begins with defining the problem, coming up with a problem statement, getting input from the team that's responsible for this idea in the form of like the questions need to be explored, developing answers to those questions, drawing conclusions and coming up with recommendations based on the work that was done. Pulling all this together is a workflow, and Ritual is a software app that allows any team in any company to do exploration of ideas or objectives, even when they're very high level and kind of raw, and kind of develop their perspective by hand holding them through this workflow. And the key thing is it embeds Gen AI at every step. So if you have trouble defining the problem, Gen AI will help you come up with options of how you do that. If you are coming up with questions that need to be explored, Gen AI is integrated to help you suggest related questions that you might include
Okay.
in your exploration. And of course, as you can imagine, Steve, when you have this content like questions and answers, Gen AI can actually produce a draft of your narrative and your document that you take to a meeting to kind of present your ideas. And so Ritual brings all that together in the form of software for teams.
Okay. How did you come up with the idea kind of for Ritual and these workflows? Is it from the Silicon Valley world, from the Fortune 500, or a combination?
It's definitely a combination because
Okay.
when I transitioned from Amazon to three Fortune 500s, McDonald's, Volvo, and MGM Resorts, I always attempted to uh, have teams build sort of the memo um, in the Amazon-like way, but it was a struggle. It's not a natural thing for people to look at a
Yeah.
blankly stare at a Word document and take this game-changing idea and begin to write 5 pages about it. It's kind of like when you have that assignment of the term paper in college and it's due the next day. And there's a lot of books you need to read and sources and thoughts, and where do you even begin? So I've hired some really bright people from great universities and great pedigrees, but we always struggled to produce a narrative in the way we did at Amazon. And the reason why is because but at the same time, it's a good practice that Amazon has where you basically invest a lot in learning about the problem that you're trying to understand, and kind of defending the perspective or the recommendations that you're making. Developing that thought process is essential. And so I thought about the role of software in that, because at Amazon it's a document, but to me, breaking it down into kind of the atomic habits is why we created Ritual, because we know that good problem solving in any company in any context is always about defining the problem, sourcing the right input, um, and using high quality input to come up with your recommendations, and then paint the picture for what actions the company needs to take in terms of decisions. That is actually not specific to Amazon. It's something that any company can use. So breaking it down into the bits, the atomic habits, is, we thought very powerful if you can have software help. And that's why we created Ritual. Now we started working on Ritual over 2.5 years ago. And as you know, um, you know, ChatGPT is about a year and 10 days old or something like that. So with the onset of Gen AI, it's made that even more timely,
Hmm.
more powerful of an opportunity.
Okay. So what kind of, either with your beta users or others, what kind of results are you seeing? What kind of feedback are you getting when they use this tool?
Well, the feedback we get, which is qualitative at this point, of course, at some point I want quantitative feedback in the form of like, oh, the projects that you run with Ritual are, happening faster, more velocity, but also higher quality. So I want concrete metrics.
Mhm.
Where we are with our beta customers is at the qualitative stage where basically one is much higher quality input. So basically, what happens today when you have a meeting and you're exploring an idea, the kind of input you get is maybe something where, um, you know, one person speaks for 15 minutes and kind of hogs the airtime. And so you kind of go down one rat hole and you only explore an idea from, a limited perspective. In the ritual system, basically, you source input independently. So everyone gets, let's say, a couple days to suggest the questions that should be part of the exploration. So you're getting more breadth and depth of questions. So that's one thing that's positive. You're getting a
Mhm.
higher quality question list to start, which I think is very interesting. The second thing that's happening is you're navigating your milestones better because you kind of can place the fact that, okay, I need to use this content for a meeting that's, let's say, 2 weeks out. So now I need to come up with all the right questions, 10 days before that and give the team 4 days to get to the bottom of those questions. And then we'll have enough content to actually produce, the materials we need with our recommendations. So you begin to actually have a better workflow that's more transparent for people, like what's the steps to get to our milestone. So those are kind of two things that have come up so far in terms of feedback. Well, we're going to look to obviously quantify those things as we
Yeah.
scale up.
Okay. Those are both, yeah, certainly valuable. I've been in too many of those meetings, yeah, where you've got 30 minutes and the first person talks for 15 and probably could have said it in 20 or 30 seconds. And then you lose out on the rest of the input, a lot of the other input.
Input is
So,
very valuable. It's essential to get problems right. Yeah, that's
okay.
right.
So then I'm assuming since you're using generative AI and other machine learning type tools within a particular organization, as they solve more and more problems, it kind of learns and can probably come up with some questions and ideas from previous projects or previous problems, and it just gets more valuable for the user.
And Steve, you're hitting on something very important, which is over time, those of us who go back in time a little bit, there's this phrase from 40 years ago, it's like knowledge management, right? Which was,
Mhm.
which is like a dinosaur term, but it's kind of resurgent because what your use case is exactly where we're headed in the enterprise, which is you have a kind of an enterprise knowledge stack, which you're going to interact with through AI. And what that means would be, for example, what do we already know about this problem that we're working on, or what do we know about similar problems? Of course, that can help you save time by suggesting similar questions, but it's even more impactful when we look at the AI potential, and this is beyond Gen AI. You start looking at human contributions. So we say, well, you know, for projects that are, this characteristic or this type, what kind of contribution do we need? And I'm imagining a world where we say, oh, we need two creatives and two pragmatists and one pessimist. And those aren't the right personas or labels, but you know, who are the six people who are going to charge with, on the working team? Today
Mhm.
is it's a little bit random, right? It's like, oh, we need one person for finance, two for marketing, and one for product. That might be right, but you need a certain form of contribution. Some people are good at asking questions. Some people are good at reasoning. Other people are good at you know, very important details. What's the construction of a team that we need based on the problem that we're trying to solve?
Interesting.
We're going to have a very powerful, very hopefully a vast data lake there where AI can match the kind of problem to the kind of talent we have in the organization.
Okay. That's interesting because I do like brainstorming meetings. I'm working with inventors and we're trying to talk about different inventions or come up with inventions that are solving problems. And I hadn't quite thought of it from that perspective. It usually plays out. We kind of have a variety of those personality types, but a lot of times we're looking at different. Let's get somebody from sales and somebody from product development, things like that, just to assess these ideas from different angles. But I guess covering those other personalities really will help with the productivity of the whole process.
Yeah,
So,
and I think we'll still do that, okay, given the problem, okay, we only have product people in this conversation. Let's get some people out in the field in sales. I think that's very healthy. So I think AI will probably also nudge for that as well,
mhm,
based on who's contributing. Um, and I think that's going to be powerful. So a lot of different ways of basically tapping the collective intelligence. In the end, that's what it's about,
sure.
is you have this organization for a reason. You have a certain amount of collective intelligence. Let's actually tap into it, as opposed to being limited to the easy way.
Mhm. That's interesting. It's such a powerful tool, the AI things that are out there, and it's just going to become more so. And as they learn the value they can provide to the organizations. So to change subjects just a little bit, you wrote a book recently called Decision Sprint. Tell us what was the motivation behind that, and kind of what's it about? What's the kind of the premise or the basic teaching of the book?
So one of the main things I picked up in my career is that, comfort with ambiguity and unknowns is something that can make teams or companies stuck, and it can limit their potential. So we all know about companies that have a great vision. Maybe they have this one PowerPoint slide with their mission, their vision, some of their strategic pillars, some of their key initiatives. Often CEOs will go and share this at Investor Day, or with their boards. And so often companies, they have a pretty good sense of what good looks like, what that North Star is. Where the challenge is activating it and getting momentum. And we don't want situations where you have a great vision and a year goes by, and where are we against it, right?
Yeah.
And the root cause of this is because people get stuck, organizations, which consist of people, right, get stuck and tripped up by the unknowns. And so the purpose of Decision Sprint is to help teams and companies, in fact, because it's an entire system, make the unknowns actionable. So just to make it concrete, you may have your strategic pillars as a company, you may have like your top 10 or 12 initiatives. For each initiative, um, how do you actually get comfortable saying there's a lot more questions than answers? These are the unknowns. You create the space for that. So, and then you're able to, navigate this, what I call this upstream journey of essentially starting with questions and getting to a point of confident decision making and moving on to execution. And so Decision Sprint, the book, is about upstream work. It's about that entire journey of starting with a raw objective and wanting to get to decision making so you can move on to execution. And the reason why I wrote the book is because I think there's still more companies out there that are better at execution than the things that come before execution,
Okay.
which is the upstream part. And if, as a company, if you can be good at the upstream part and you're already good at execution, wow, you're really going to get a lot of momentum in things.
Okay. So is the book for any company? Are there particular industries or particular sizes of companies that it's best for?
It works for a tech company. It works for Fortune 500 company. It works for teams. It works for groups of teams. If you're a leader and you have a large organization, it probably is relevant for a certain scale. So you get that complexity, or where things are hard, or you need to, like, things get locked up in silos and you need to collaborate in a really effective way. Once you're over a certain size, 300 people, um, as an organization. If you're 10 people, I think you solve problems in different ways that are agile. You just figure it out. And but yeah, once you're at a certain scale of a few hundred people, I think you need a system. Otherwise, um, you're it's going to be hard to get consistent, high level of problem solving and innovation across the board.
Okay. I've I've talked with a lot of authors and author myself. What surprises came to you or new insights as you wrote the book? Everybody always seems to have at least something that kind of was unexpected.
Well, it's a 300-page book, and the truth is, I mean, it could probably be 600, but who has time to write that and who has time to read that? But but yeah, I think basically the surprise for me was that, there's a deep well of experience that we accumulate over time. And I'm just one person. I'm sure many in your audience are very accomplished people too, So the stories are, to pull out the lessons from the story and sort of what is the sort of systematic learning from that lesson. There's so much to pull on, and that's the benefit of sticking around in a career for, for 15 or 20 or 20 plus years.
Mhm.
You have a lot to tap into and share that can be save other people time.
Okay. So, in your current work, and I know you've got quite a few different activities going on, what's the favorite part? What do you love the most?
Well, I like these. I like these, these informal conversations because
Okay.
I think it's a good way to casually spread things. But what I like the most, Steve, is basically I would say empowering people um, to be motivated to think and act differently in terms of the ways of working because it's just it's hard. You're living in an organization. There's a certain construct and the way things are getting done, and sometimes you feel like it could be a little bit lonely trying to push it, right? And it's just easier to kind of live in with the limitations of those ways of working. But what I enjoy the most is motivating people to say, no, you can actually change your team and your organization. It doesn't take as much effort as it is possible, number one. And it doesn't take as much effort as one may think. Um, so, for example, just the idea of there's a mantra I put in my book, exploration before alignment, because I find in companies a lot of times they want to align and shrink down an idea before they've given it the space to explore it. And so just the idea of promoting the notion of building explorations and using that before you say yes or no to a decision and explaining what a good exploration looks like and how it doesn't take that much time and how useful it is. Once you start uh, doing this once or twice, these things can spread as a behavior. They can spread like wildfire in a positive way in your organization. So what I enjoy most is spreading these ways of working that I think help companies and help teams.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Very, very valuable. What's ahead for you and your team in the coming 12 or 18 months?
Well, I think we're going to have companies that we run in very different ways. I'm talking about everything from, the largest companies in the world, whether it's Disney, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Walmart, Apple, to, your 500 person company. All companies will be run, in a way where there's sort of, if you look further ahead, there's an AI brain in the company, and humans and AI will work together in a harmonious way.
Yeah.
And to me, we're in the early stages of this, and the way it starts is by picking one initiative and saying, okay, well, we're going to, you know, approach this with a really progressive and kind of world-class method for problem solving, kind of like your Amazon approach or, something like a ritual or some flavor of those things.
Mhm.
And we're just going to move a lot faster and smarter because we're embedding AI into how we go through it, And so I think integrating AI into the work of teams is really where my focus is. Um, and it's not only to drive productivity for the companies, right? Oh, efficiency, productivity, higher velocity, all that good stuff. But it's actually to um, make the workplace better for employees as well, because they'll be having a higher level of contribution. And so I think a kind of a operating system for companies that's really AI driven, and the implications on the nature of work, the future of work, the types of jobs that are out there, what leaders do, how teams operate. I think this transition is the biggest transition we'll see in how companies are organized and run since, kind of the Peter Drucker era of 1950s management.
Hmm.
So it's going to be a big change, and so we want to kind of be in the center of that, and hopefully make that pan out well for companies and people.
Okay. That sounds exciting. It should keep you busy. And yeah, things are, the new headlines every day as far as new applications and new AI breakthroughs or whatever. So that's it's exciting times, exciting to see this and all the tools and that are available at a reasonable cost to companies of all sizes. I mean, startups can use this all the way to the Fortune 500.
It's
So
definitely going to take a while. It's going to take it
yes,
might take 10 years, but it's all happening quickly at the same time.
yeah, it should be a fun ride. I look forward to it. Well, I want to thank you, Atif, for coming on today and sharing your knowledge, your interesting experience, and your interesting journey. A lot of valuable information there. If any of the listeners want to get in touch with you or reach out, what's the best way to connect?
Sure. Well, I do look in my LinkedIn, so
Okay.
I also run a newsletter there called Rewire. You can subscribe to it, and I post. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, so very reachable there. I have a website, decisionsprint.com, and so if you're interested in the book, you can check that out. And with Ritual, if you're interested, that's ritual.work. Um, and my team and I would be happy to share it with you.
Okay. And I'll put links to all those links in the show notes so any of the listeners can find them easily. And I would, yeah, definitely recommend the Rewire newsletter. I've been reading that, and it's good information, and it's fun to keep up on kind of what you're doing and some of the things that you're seeing in the industry and in the tech world and throughout business. So um, okay, well, thanks again, Atif. I loved the interview. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today.
It's been a pleasure joining you, Steve. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I really appreciate all your questions.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure.